Next, it is time to make your connections to the ignition harness. Usually, your ignition wires will be found in a bundle coming out of the back of the ignition cylinder. The vehicle wiring diagram you download from the internet will help you find these wires. Always use your LED tester or digital voltmeter to verify these wires before you connect to them. In order for us to identify the proper ignition wires, we will need to turn the key to the start, run, and accessory positions. With your LED tester or digital voltmeter set to read DC voltage, we will first measure the ignition 1 wire of the vehicle. This wire is usually responsible for providing both fuel and spark to the engine. This wire will measure 12 volts before, during, and after cranking the starter. Go ahead and connect the ignition 1 wire of the remote start to the ignition 1 wire in the car. If your vehicle-specific wiring diagram refers to an ignition 2 wire, follow the same test procedure for that wire and connect the ignition 2 output from the remote starter to it. The next wire we are going to locate is the accessory wire. On most vehicles, this wire will operate circuits such as the radio, windshield wipers, and power windows. More importantly, this wire is used to power up the air conditioning or climate control system. Some vehicles have more than one accessory circuit. If your vehicle falls under this category, i.e. newer Fords and GMs, you will need to purchase additional relays. Please refer to the vehicle wiring diagram for specific instructions. An accessory wire tests differently than an ignition wire, and it is very important that you power each of these circuits correctly. The correct accessory wire will show 12 volts before and after cranking, but will go to 0 volts during cranking. It is important that these wires be powered as accessory wires and not as ignition wires. The last wire we will connect is the starter wire. This wire is responsible for cranking the starter. You will need to find a wire that registers 12 volts in the start position only. Once the key is released from the start position, the voltage will fall back to 0 volts. This is your starter wire. Connect the starter wire output from the remote starter unit to this wire. Please note that some cars have 2 starter wires, i.e. Nissans and some newer Chryslers. In this case, you will need 2 relays to properly interface both starter wires. Begin by splitting the starter output from the remote start system into 2 ends. Run each end to number 85 on each of your 5-pin 30-amp relays. You will then need to ground number 86 on each relay. Next, run a constant 12-volt supply to number 87 on both relays. And finally, take number 30 from each relay and run them to the respective starter wires in the car. Earlier, we ran the hood pin and tack wires into the engine compartment. The hood pin switch is a very important safety feature. It will prevent the remote starter from operating if the hood of the vehicle is open. This is a critical component that must be installed in order for the remote start to function properly and safely. Find a location to mount the hood pin switch that won't interfere with any wires or parts in the engine compartment. The hood pin needs to depress all the way when the hood is closed to ensure proper operation. You'll need to drill a 5/16 inch hole for the pin switch, securing the supplied star washer and nut to the bottom side. Clear away any paint and/or dirt from the surface, then insert the pin switch into the hole and secure. Next, crimp the spade connector to the hood pin wire of the remote starter and plug the spade connector into the bottom of the hood pin switch. Finally, we will need to connect the brake wire. This wire is not optional. It deactivates the remote starter after you insert your key and also shuts down remote start if someone tries to drive off in your car during remote start. Using your digital voltmeter or LED tester, probe the brake light wire referenced on your printout. This wire should show 12 volts whenever the brake pedal is pressed. Be aware, however, that in some vehicles, this wire will only test with the ignition on. Connect this wire to the brake wire input of the remote starter. Most new vehicles come with factory immobilizers, which prevent the vehicle from starting without the owner's special key. Since there is no key present during remote start, these immobilizers need to be specially interfaced with a separate module. Please refer to the website or your vehicle owner's manual to determine whether or not your vehicle uses an immobilizer. For your convenience, Directed Electronics manufactures a variety of remote start interface modules which interface with the factory immobilizer only during remote start, leaving it fully functional at all other times. These bypass modules are usually available at the same location you purchased your remote starter from. In addition, a greatly simplified installation is possible on certain vehicles by using a directed electronics data bus interface module, which interfaces digitally with the vehicle's factory data bus. A digital multimeter may be required for these installations. These modules can also be purchased at the same locations as the bypass modules. When mounting the bypass module, it is very important to observe a few things. First, when using a bypass module that requires a key to be placed in the box, i.e. transponder-style immobilizers, placement is everything. The ring from these types of bypass modules must be placed in front of the factory transponder ring built into the ignition. The bypass ring cannot be hung behind the factory ring. Secure the bypass ring around the ignition cylinder, leaving room for the plastic steering column shroud to be reinstalled. Be sure to eliminate any access to this module when mounting under the dash. This will prevent any potential thieves from being able to take the key out of your bypass and start your car. One of the most common mistakes when installing a transponder-style bypass is placing the ring behind the factory ring or too far in front of it. A good rule of thumb is to place the ring as close as possible to where the plastic part of your key normally sits when inserted into the ignition. Your goal when mounting the ring is to trick the computer in the car into thinking you have inserted a real key. Be sure to center and secure the key properly inside the bypass module. Note, the white wires inside this module must not crisscross each other. Another common immobilizer system that you may run into on GM vehicles is Pass Lock 2. It is imperative that when integrating with this type of system, you solder all your connections. Pass Lock 2 is a resistance-based immobilizer, and T-taps or butt connectors will introduce additional resistance, causing the remote start system to fail when attempting to crank the starter. The brain module is typically mounted under the driver's side of the dash. Use zip ties to attach the module. A large wire harness is a good place to start. You may also find small cavities where the brain may fit and can attach the module there. Be careful not to mount the brain on or next to any moving parts, such as a steering column. Don't screw the module directly to metal. This will help ensure maximum range. When mounting the valet switch or override button, depending on the system, be sure not to attach to any metal surfaces. The ideal location for these switches would be a plastic panel or cover, such as a kick panel. You want the switch to be accessible, but not an advertisement for potential thieves. Many directed do-it-yourself keyless entry systems feature built-in relays that will interface with the power door lock systems on most vehicles. On select ready remote products, you may have to use external relays, as in the case of reverse polarity door lock systems. Please refer to your manual to determine if the module requires external relays for your specific locking system. If you find that you need to purchase external relays for this or any other part of the install, you will need to locate a standard 12-volt 30-amp relay with 5 terminals. Although there are literally thousands of different model year vehicles on the road at any one time, there are 8 basic types of door lock systems. The 4 most common door lock systems are positive trigger, common on GM vehicles, negative trigger, common on Fords and Asian vehicles, reverse polarity, common on older GM and Chrysler vehicles, and finally multiplex, common on late model Chrysler vehicles. Please refer to your vehicle-specific wiring diagram to determine which door locking system your vehicle uses.